On January 13, 2006, 6 men walked into a bank in Buenos Aires. They carried guns, they took hostages, and for 8 hours they held an entire nation captive. But here's what nobody knew at the time. Those guns, they were toys. The hostages, they were eating pizza. And while 300 police officers surrounded the building with snipers on every rooftop, the real crime was happening 30 meters below their feet. This is the story of the Banco Rio heist, the robbery that fooled a country, and the tunnel that changed everything. To understand this story, you need to understand Argentina in 2006. Just 4 years earlier, the country had collapsed. The economy had imploded. Banks froze people's accounts. Life savings vanished overnight. Riots filled the streets. The government fell. By 2006, things were better. The crisis had passed, but the scars remained. And in the quiet suburb of Acassuso, in a branch of Banco Rio, people were beginning to trust banks again. They were putting their valuables back into safety deposit boxes, their jewelry, their cash, their secrets. Fernando Araujo knew this. He was 41 years old, a martial arts instructor, a man who studied patterns, who watched, who waited, and who saw an opportunity that nobody else could see. Because Fernando understood something fundamental about robberies. Everyone thinks the hard part is getting in, but that's not true. The hard part is getting out. For 8 months, Fernando planned. He didn't just plan a robbery. He planned a performance. A piece of theater so convincing that the audience would never realize they were watching a show. He recruited 5 men, each one a specialist. There was Sebastian Garcia Bolster, 40 years old, an engineer with a gift for understanding spaces. They called him the engineer. There was Mario Vitette Solanas, the man in the gray suit. There was another Sebastian, nicknamed the Martian, and 2 others whose names we still don't know. They called them the Doctor and the Kid. But the real genius of the plan wasn't the people. It was the tunnel. Sebastian, the engineer, spent weeks studying the city's sewer system, the maps, the layouts, the distances. He calculated that the Banco Rio vault was exactly 30 meters from a storm drain. 30 meters of earth and concrete between freedom and $20 million. So we started digging. Not all at once, not in a rush, slowly, carefully, using the city's own infrastructure against itself. He worked in the sewers, in the dark, in the filth, carving a path that nobody would ever think to look for. Because here's what's brilliant about this plan. While everyone expects a bank robber to think about alarms and cameras and guards, Fernando and his team were thinking about geology, about drainage systems, about the invisible architecture beneath a city that everyone walks over but nobody sees. The tunnel took weeks to complete, maybe months. The exact timeline is still unclear, but by January of 2006, it was ready. A narrow passage through the earth marked with special paint that could only be seen with night vision goggles. A secret road to the vault. But a tunnel alone wasn't enough, because even if you can get into a vault, you still need time. Time to open the safety deposit boxes, time to sort through the contents, time to escape, and that's where the hostages came in. January 13th, a Friday afternoon. The 6 men walked through the front doors of Banco Rio at exactly 2:30 p.m. They wore casual clothes, they carried bags, and they pulled out guns. Except they weren't guns. They were replicas, toys, pieces of plastic, painted black. 23 people were inside the bank. Customers, employees, regular people having a regular day. And suddenly, they were hostages. The police were called immediately. Within minutes, squad cars surrounded the building. Within an hour, 300 officers had taken positions. Snipers climbed onto rooftops. Negotiators set up phone lines. The media arrived with cameras and helicopters. Argentina watched. The whole country tuned in to see how this hostage situation would end. But inside the bank, something strange was happening. The robbers weren't acting like criminals. They were calm, almost friendly. They told the hostages to relax. They ordered pizza from a restaurant across the city, specifically choosing one far away to delay delivery and buy more time. They let people call their families. They sang happy birthday to one of the hostages. One witness later said it felt less like a robbery and more like a very tense party. Hours passed. The police waited. The negotiators talked. The snipers watched through their scopes. Everyone assumed this was a standard hostage situation. Desperate criminals, trapped, trying to negotiate their way out. Nobody thought to look down. Because while the police focused on the front door, while the media broadcast from the street, while the entire nation watched and waited, Sebastian Garcia Bolster was 30 meters away, breaking through the final barrier of his tunnel. He emerged in the basement, in the vault, surrounded by 147 safety deposit boxes. And he had exactly 2 hours. The team worked fast. They pried open box after box. Cash, jewelry, gold, documents. Some boxes held fortunes. Others held secrets, family heirlooms, evidence of affairs, proof of crimes. The private wealth of Acassuso's elite, all hidden away in metal boxes, now being emptied into bags. They didn't take everything. They couldn't. There wasn't time. But they took enough. Estimates vary, but somewhere between $8 and $20 million in valuables disappeared into those bags. And then came the escape. The tunnel was partially flooded. The sewers beneath Buenos Aires are old and water collects in low points. So the team used inflatable rafts. They loaded the bags onto the rafts and pulled them through the dark, through the water, through the tunnel that nobody knew existed. They emerged at a manhole, and waiting above, perfectly positioned, was a van. But not just any van. This van had been modified. The floor had been cut away and replaced with a hatch. When the manhole cover lifted, the robbers could climb directly into the van without ever